This is my first video update from Athens, Greece on this Wednesday morning. Let's talk about the Nord Stream pipeline articles, because we have two articles, one from the US New York Times and another one from the German publication ZEIT. Actually, it was a group of German publications that came out with their Nord Stream pipeline sabotage reports, but in this video, I will talk about one of those German publications that was involved, which was ZEIT Online. So we had yesterday two media outlets, one American, the New York Times, and another German, both of them coming out with their investigative reports on the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage. This comes 3 days after German Chancellor Olaf Scholz visited Joe Bidenopolis, Greece's favorite son, in the White House, where they had a very secretive, behind closed doors, one-on-one meeting. No media was allowed, no press conference after the meeting, no statements from either government, just Olaf Scholz and Joe Biden meeting together in the White House. 3 days later, we get a report from the New York Times, and we get a report from ZEIT Online, a German publication. And they both come to the same conclusion as to who orchestrated the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline. And both publications claim that the pipeline was blown up by pro-Ukrainian groups. That was their conclusion, both the New York Times and ZEIT Online. Biden meets with Scholz. 3 days later, we are given articles from the US and Germany, which claim to have taken us one step closer to figuring out who blew apart these pipelines. Coincidence? Perhaps. Perhaps. But let's get into a summary of these investigative reports. So the New York Times, they claim that the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage was orchestrated by anti-Putin, pro-Ukrainian groups, as well as anti-Putin Russian nationals. They claim that it was most likely a combination of these two groups that must have had some sort of military diving experience, and they orchestrated this sabotage on the Nord Stream pipeline. Now, the New York Times article, it does not get into many details as to how they did it, how they planned it, how they got to the pipelines, what explosives they used. They don't get into any of that. They just basically use anonymous sources who claim that they have seen reports and intelligence which point to pro-Ukrainian groups and anti-Kremlin Russian nationals to have been behind this terrorist act. The New York Times article, way in the beginning, the first paragraph, it states that so far, these anonymous sources, this anonymous intel that they're citing, so far they don't see any evidence pointing to Ukraine President Zelensky having ordered the attack, or anyone in his government so far. This is what they say in the first paragraph. Further on down the article, the New York Times does talk about how if evidence emerges pointing to Ukraine government officials or even Zelensky himself, well, then this would be a major setback in the Ukraine project and keeping European partners signed up, specifically Germany, in Project Ukraine. So the New York Times makes a point to say in the first paragraph, no evidence of Zelensky or Ukraine government so far, but if evidence does come up that the Ukraine government or Zelensky gave the order to these pro-Ukrainian, anti-Putin groups to blow up the pipeline, then this would pose a very serious problem to Project Ukraine, especially for Germany and for the Biden White House's European allies. Now, the article also makes it a point to say that no American or British nationals were involved in this pipeline sabotage. It specifically says no American or British nationals were involved in this pipeline sabotage. The article also talks about the frustration that U.S. officials and U.S. Intel have with their Ukraine partners, claiming that the U.S. military and U.S. intelligence, the CIA, that they are often left in the dark as to many of the activities that the Ukraine military and the Ukrainian SBU, the intel services, undertake. And the New York Times article goes on to list some of the actions or alleged actions that the Ukraine government or the Ukraine intel services did, which went against U.S. military or intel advice or completely left the U.S. military or intel services in the dark, such as the attack on the Kerch Bridge in Crimea, the drone strikes deep inside of Russia, as well as talking about the assassination of Daria Dugina. And in the New York Times article, the point that the assassination of Daria Dugina was done without the knowledge of U.S. intel officials was so important in this article that they even have a big photograph of Daria Dugina in this article, and they dedicate a good couple of paragraphs to this incident to further the case that the Zelensky government and Ukraine SBU, they have done things which the U.S. government and the military have advised against, and many times without the U.S. military or U.S. intel knowing about it. So that's the case that they lay out, the New York Times. Now, before I get to ZEIT Online and what they say, I just want to point to the fact that last week there was a terrorist attack in Bryansk, in the Bryansk region in Russia. And somehow, some way, I don't know how this happened, but the Financial Times, they managed to actually interview the guy who committed the terrorist attack. The Moscow-born far-right militia leader who led a raid out of Ukraine into Russia has claimed he aimed to expose the country's weak defenses and inspire more compatriots to rise up against Vladimir Putin. Denis Nikitin, a notorious extremist who heads the Russian Volunteer Corps, told the Financial Times that his Ukraine-based fighters had proved they could breach some of Russia's most heavily guarded borders. Nikitin, 38, a polyglot who also goes by the name Denis Kapustin, and the nom de guerre Rex, after his white nationalist clothing brand, White Rex, is a former mixed martial arts fighter with ties to neo-Nazis and white nationalists across the Western world. Nikitin said Ukrainian authorities had signed off on the operation. Yes, of course, this action was agreed. Otherwise, it couldn't have happened, he said. This was an interview conducted by the Financial Times of this Nikitin guy who brands himself as an anti-Putin Russian national. Somehow the Financial Times scored an interview with this anti-Putin Russian national terrorist who claims that he wanted to expose Russia's weakness at the border. He wanted to expose the weak border security of Russia to inspire others to commit such terrorist attacks. And he says that he was given the order by Ukraine authorities. They signed off on his operation in Bryansk. The New York Times claims that these pro-Ukrainian groups, part of this pro-Ukrainian group that executed the Nord Stream sabotage, part of the group was anti-Putin Russian nationals. They were part of this plot. It's interesting that the New York Times claims that no evidence is pointing to the Zelensky regime yet. But U.S. intel officials, they're very frustrated with some of the covert activities of the Zelensky regime and Ukrainian intelligence services. It makes you wonder that if Zelensky were to step out of line in any way, or if they really wanted to throw Zelensky under the bus, all they would have to do is come up with some sort of document or deep fake audio where Zelensky gives the order, much in the same way that this guy in the Financial Times interview that committed the Bryansk terrorist attack claims Ukrainian authorities signed off on the Bryansk terrorist attack. All that you would need is some sort of investigative report citing anonymous officials who have some sort of recording or document which shows that someone in the Zelensky government ordered the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline. Maybe a deep fake with Zelensky calling up some of these Ukraine nationals, these anti-Russian nationals, and telling them, look, I want you guys to blow up the pipeline. Do it now. Do it now. Blow up that pipeline. I give you the order. Blow it up. Oh, and by the way, do you guys have some money to give me? Yeah. If Zelensky steps out of line, wait for that recording to surface. Wait for that recording to surface. So that is the New York Times investigative reports. In a nutshell, I will put a link to the archived version of this report so you can give it a good read. It's very, very thin on details. Very thin on details, but it gets its overall message out there. Interestingly enough, in closing, before I get to the German article, the Financial Times interview of the Bryansk terrorist, the Financial Times also talks about Daria Dugina and how her assassination went against the advice of U.S. intel and military sources, and they were left in the dark about this assassination. So they also mention Daria Dugina. So the Financial Times mentions it. It brings it up. The New York Times brings it up in this piece. It's actually very central to this New York Times Nord Stream piece, and I just thought I would throw that out there. I found that to be interesting, an interesting connection between the two reports from the New York Times and the other report from the Financial Times. So the ZEIT Online. The ZEIT Online is actually a little more detailed than the New York Times article. It claims that this group of German publications, one of them being ZEIT Online, and a couple of other German publications, I believe from the ARD group, they got together and they decided they're going to do their own investigation into the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage. And the conclusion that they came up with was that this was done by Ukraine nationals, anti-Putin Ukraine nationals. They said it was a group of around 6 people, of which they even have the passports of some of these people, or at least that's what they're leading us to believe, because they claim that the passports of these individuals were forged. And they claim that this was done by 6 individuals. They rented a yacht. I believe they said they rented a yacht in Poland. They went out to where the pipeline was. 5 of these individuals were men. 1 was a woman. She was the doctor. A couple of them were divers. They went out to where the Nord Stream pipeline was located with this yacht that they had rented, and they blew it up. They blew it up. That's what the German publication is telling us. And they returned the yacht back to the service where they rented it from, and they left it in terrible condition. They left it in such bad shape that when they investigated this yacht, they actually found traces of explosives. They didn't clean up the yacht. They didn't do anything like that. They just blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, these 6 individuals. They just blew up critical European, German infrastructure, Russian, German, European infrastructure, gas pipeline infrastructure. They blew the whole thing up, and they didn't bother to clean up the yacht, to blow up the yacht. They actually returned the yacht to where they had rented it from, and they found traces of explosives, and were being led to believe that they also found passports, because they claim that there are passports that were forged, which point to these 6 individuals. That's how they know that one of them was a female doctor. The other 5 were men. 2 of them had some sort of military diving experience. This is what they want us to believe. That is the report from ZEIT Online. I will put a link to that report down below as well, an archived link to that report as well. It's in German, but it's not a very long article. It's maybe 3-4 paragraphs long. Run it through Translate, and you'll get an idea as to what they are saying. So that is the big news. And I think I covered all of the key points. Incredible stuff. I mean, really incredible stuff. Let's see here. According to the investigation, I'm reading a little bit from the ZEIT article. According to the investigation, the command set sail from Rostock on September 6, 2022. The equipment for the secret operation was previously transported to the port in a delivery truck. According to the research, the investigators subsequently managed to locate the boat again the following day in Wieck and later on the Danish island of Kristiansø, northeast of Bornholm. This is run through translate, so it may be a little off. The yacht was then returned to the owner in an uncleaned condition. According to research, investigators found traces of explosives on the table and in the cabin. They also say here the nationality of the perpetrators is apparently unclear, but the team consisted of a captain, 2 divers, 2 diving assistants, and a doctor who are said to have transported the explosives to the crime scene and placed them there. But there are reports of passports. So I have no idea how they're coming to these conclusions. The assassins used professionally forged passports, which are said to have been used, among other things, to rent the boat. And they rented from a company based in Poland, apparently owned by 2 Ukrainians. I'm just reading through this, and I the title of the ZEIT article is Nord Stream Investigations Traces Lead to Ukraine. Investigators have identified the boat from which the Nord Stream attacks were carried out. Apparently, it was rented by a company owned by Ukrainians. I have to admit, I am speechless. Absolutely speechless. Seymour Hersh, from what I understand, Seymour Hersh was giving an interview, I believe with Izvestia, the Russian publication Izvestia, but I could be wrong there. But he was giving an interview and he was told about the New York Times report, and he laughed it off and he said that he's got more reports on the way with Nord Stream. So he's got his own reports coming. So that is where we are. That is where we are with Nord Stream. Anti-Putin Russian nationals and pro-Ukrainian forces. They're the ones that blew up this pipeline. I guess it's a way of saying that that the CIA blew apart these pipelines, right? Pro-Ukrainian, anti-Putin. NATO, CIA, Zelensky regime, Stoltenberg, Ursula, the European Union, Germany, Annalena Baerbock. Take your pick of anti-Putin, pro-Ukrainian groups. I'm just joking. I'm not claiming that Annalena or Ursula or Schultz or any of them blew apart the pipeline. I'm just making a point that the people they claim to have blown apart the pipeline are anti-Russian nationals and pro-Ukrainian groups. That's quite a lot of people. That's the whole collective West globalist elite. You know who I think did it? Here's who I think did it. I think it was 2 guys wearing red Trump hats, and before they blew up the pipeline, they screamed, "This is MAGA country." Kaboom! This is MAGA country. That's who I think did it. All right, I'll leave it there. This is very, very convenient for the Biden White House, very convenient for Olaf Scholz, who is getting a lot of pressure for the Seymour Hersh article. He was getting a lot of pressure. Very, very convenient for him. Convenient for the Biden White House. Convenient for the European Union as well. This really does solve a lot of their Nord Stream sabotage pipeline media optics problems, doesn't it? Anti-Putin, pro-Ukrainian groups, anti-Putin Russian nationals. Yeah, they're the ones that did it. And they returned the yacht. They blew up a pipeline, but they returned the yacht. Oh my, oh my. My, oh my. Yeah, sure, why not? I mean, you know, they're smart enough to blow up a pipeline, but they're not smart enough to dispose of the yacht. Anyway, let's wait for Seymour Hersh's report. He said he's coming out with more reports on the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage. Let's wait for more reports from the New York Times and ZEIT Online and other publications, which I'm sure are going to come out with their own reports citing anonymous officials. The New York Times article was picked up by everybody. The Seymour Hersh Substack article was picked up by nobody in the mainstream media. Keep that in mind. Anyway, let's move on to other news. There are riots in Georgia, and this has to do with a law that was passed by the parliament in Georgia. And this law is a foreign agents bill, and it basically says that if your entity receives 20% of its funding from outside sources, then it has to register as a foreign agent. And it looks like George Soros was not very happy with this bill, and so thousands of people poured onto the streets, I believe in Tbilisi. The videos that we see are in Tbilisi, and they poured out into the streets. Riot police were there. I think a lot of this was in front of Parliament. Tear gas was used to disperse the crowds. Things got very violent. A lot of these protesters, somehow they all had EU and Ukraine flags. I don't know who gave them the Ukraine and the EU flags, but they all had Ukrainian and EU flags as well. And they're very upset. For some reason, they're very upset that entities in Georgia receiving 20% or more of funding from outside sources are going to have to register as foreign agents. Why are just everyday people upset with this? What if you're working for a university that receives 20% of its funding from George Soros, and you're a university professor? Why would this upset you? What do you care? Am I still going to get paid? Yes, okay. I don't care if this university has to register as a foreign agent or whatever. As long as I'm still making a salary and I've got a job teaching at this university, whatever. Interesting to know that it's funded by Soros or by foreign governments, but at the end of the day, why would all of these everyday people pour onto the streets to protest a bill which has to do with entities receiving 20% of their funding from foreign actors? How does this affect everyday people? I don't know. How does this affect them to the point where they have to get onto the streets and get violent? I don't know. But that's the situation in Georgia. A very Maidan-esque type of situation happening in Georgia. Ned Price, State Department spokesman, he said that the U.S. supports the right of protesters in Georgia, of course. Of course he does, because I'm positive that 99.99% of all of the entities that are getting funded by foreign actors are getting funded by the U.S. deep state, or guys like Soros or Bill Gates or Klaus Schwab, etc. So, yeah, that's what's going on in Georgia. Zelensky, he gave an interview to CNN, to Wolf Blitzer. Wolf Blitzer, he's very serious. Wolf Blitzer is a very serious journalist. He gave an interview to CNN's Wolf Blitzer, and Zelensky said that Bakhmut is very strategic. Huh? What? What? I thought it was not strategic. I thought it was symbolic. No. Bakhmut is very strategic. Zelensky warned CNN, he warned Wolf Blitzer that Ukraine has to absolutely fight for Bakhmut, because if Russia takes Bakhmut, then he said it would be, and I quote, an open road through Ukraine's east. Zelensky said that this is tactical for us. We understand that after Bakhmut, they could go further. They could go to Kramatorsk, they could go to Slavyansk. It would be open road for Russians after Bakhmut to other towns in Ukraine in the Donetsk direction. Really? Really? It's strategic now? Bakhmut is strategic? That's what Zelensky is saying to CNN. So, it's not symbolic anymore. Bakhmut is not symbolic. Bakhmut is now strategic. It is of tactical importance. If the Russians get Bakhmut, then they have an open road, according to Zelensky, an open road to the rest of Donetsk. Well, that narrative has changed quickly. And now let's do a couple of clown worlds. So the first clown world has to do with reports that Ursula von der Crazy, if she does not get reelected as the EU supreme leader, she will throw her hat into the NATO supreme leader election. She wants to be NATO Secretary General if she is not reelected as the European Commission President. Now, I don't know who elects Ursula von der Crazy as European Commission President. I imagine it's the European Parliament. They're the ones that elect her or re-elect her. But in all honesty, it's just probably done by George Soros and Klaus Schwab. They probably sit down at a table together and say, do we want Ursula as EC president again? Has she wrecked Europe enough so that we can get the Great Reset moving, or so that we can enrich ourselves further? George Soros wants to know that Ursula wrecked Europe enough so that he can make more and more billions, and Klaus Schwab wants to know that Ursula wrecked Europe enough so that he could get his Great Reset project moving. So they're going to sit down with each other and they're going to say yes or no. And then they're going to tell the people in Parliament, this is how you're going to vote. I imagine that's how the process goes down. But all right. So if Ursula doesn't make it as the EC president, she is going to go for Secretary General of NATO. So let's break down the NATO candidates. We have 4 women who are Secretary General possibilities. We have now Ursula von der Crazy. We have Chrystia Freeland. We have Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, though I believe that Kallas may pull out of the running since her party recently won the elections in Estonia. But you have 4 women in the running for the NATO Secretary General position. Ursula, Chrystia Freeland, Kaja Kallas, and Boris Johnson. Those are the candidates for NATO Secretary General. or those are who are being talked about as potential candidates for NATO Secretary General. Each of them would do an incredible job in destroying NATO. For this, I have no doubt. Each of the four candidates would do an excellent job in running NATO into the ground. All four of them are incompetent in their own special ways. And let's do a final clown world. This one will be a quick one. It has to do with Jungle Joseph. Jungle Joseph and the town where he's from, the village where I guess he was born or where he grew up, which is in Portugal. It's in the Lleida Pyrenees, called La Pobla de Segur. And it looks like that they had a street named after Jungle Joseph. And now they are conducting a referendum about removing his name from one of their streets. So it looks like Jungle Joseph has fallen out of favor with the village, the town where he comes from. Poor Jungle Joseph. Anyway, that's the video, guys. theduran.locals.com. We are on Rockfin as well. And go to the Duran shop. Since I talked about Portugal, this is my Portugal army green long sleeve shirt from the Duran shop. That's the video. 10% off. Use the code. Good day. Take care.